I should tell you straight away that I am not the hero of this story. The hero is my brother Rowan Aldrich Vale, 4th Duke of Caldmore, feared in 2 counties and misunderstood in both, a man who spent 9 years loving someone in total silence and called it nothing, and who I watched do so from a distance close enough to see every detail and far enough away to understand that what I was witnessing was something I would never be capable of myself. I am the younger brother. I have always been the one who talks. Rowan is the one who acts. This is the story of the most consequential thing he ever did, and the only reason I am telling it is that he will not. He would say there is nothing to tell. He would say a man does what is necessary and says nothing about it because saying something about it would change its nature, would make it a performance rather than a fact, and that if you need to announce that you love someone, you have already begun to fail at loving them. He would say this with the expression he wears when he has decided a conversation is over, which is a particular stillness of the jaw and a specific quality of looking at the middle distance that has silenced more capable arguers than me. I am telling it anyway. He can take it up with me when he reads it if he ever does. The first thing you need to understand about Rowan is what he looked like to the world for the 9 years in question, because the gap between that and what I knew him to be is the whole point of the story. To Caldmore County, the 4th Duke was cold, arrogant, capable of extraordinary focus and extraordinary indifference in roughly equal measure, a man who managed his estate with the precision of a military campaign and his social obligations with the minimum warmth required to discharge them and no more. He attended the assembly. He received callers. He sat at the head of the table at the dinners that a duke is expected to give and said the correct things in the correct order and communicated, by means that were all the more effective for being entirely invisible, that the dinner would conclude at the hour he had designated, and that deviation would not be welcomed. He was not, to be clear, unkind. He simply did not perform warmth, which in a county that expected warmth to be performed read as its absence. People were afraid of him. They were also, I noticed over the years, reassured by him. The county ran well under his management, disputes were settled fairly, the roads were kept, the tenants were dealt with honestly. The fear and the reassurance coexisted because they had the same source. He was exactly what he said he was, which in a world of people who were mostly somewhat less than what they said they was an unusual and slightly alarming quality. What the county did not know, what almost no one knew, was what he had been doing for 9 years with the considerable resources of attention, money, and practical intelligence that a feared duke of a well-run estate could bring to bear on a problem he had decided mattered to him. I knew. I had been watching him since the beginning, partly because I am the kind of person who notices things and partly because there is a specific quality to my brother's attention when it is focused on something that matters. And once I saw it directed at Miss Nora Ashby, I understood that something was happening that was going to be very important, and that I should pay attention to it carefully. The beginning was the autumn. Rowan was 26, and Nora was 17. I was 22. I was between things, between a second year at university that had not gone quite as planned and a position in the law that had not yet materialized, and I was staying at Caldmore Hall for the duration of that in-between, which my brother permitted with the characteristic non-effusiveness that meant he did not mind at all. I knew the Moor roads well. I knew the particular quality of an autumn storm on the high moor, which is not like a storm anywhere else. It comes in sideways and it comes fast and it cares nothing for your plans. Rowan had been out on the eastern road checking a tenant dispute and had been caught in the worst of it. The horse had come back without him at 9 in the evening. I had taken 2 men and a lantern and gone out onto the Moor road and found my brother 3 miles from the hall, on the ground beside the road, his shoulder broken and his leg badly turned, and a considerable amount of blood on his coat from a cut above his temple that looked worse than it was but looked very bad. He had not come alone on the road, as it turned out. There had been someone else. She was 17. I learned this later, the daughter of the governess at the Ashwick Rectory, walking the road home from a delivery she had made to a farmhouse on the High Moor, which was the sort of thing a governess's daughter in Ashwick did when the family needed something and there was no one else to send. She had found him on the road. She had given him her coat. It was on him when we arrived, a plain gray wool coat that clearly was not his, and she had sat with him in the rain for an hour and a half, holding a cloth from her bag against the cut on his head, with the calm, steady pressure of someone who had decided that this was what needed doing and was doing it. When we arrived with the lantern, she was still there. She was soaked through and shivering because she had given him her coat, and she was talking to him in a low, steady voice about something I couldn't quite hear. Later he told me she had been talking about the moor, describing what she could see in the dark, naming the shapes of things, because she had said he needed to stay awake, and she had thought describing things might help. She told us her name. She accepted the second coat one of the men offered her. She helped us get Rowan onto the makeshift stretcher with the practical efficiency of someone who has been managing things on her own for long enough that the presence of capable adults is a relief rather than a substitution. She gave directions to her house so we could send the coat back in the morning. Then she walked home in the rain. I watched my brother watch her go. It was a look I had never seen from him before and have never seen him direct at anything or anyone else in the 22 years since. Not admiration. He was in too much pain for admiration. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man who has encountered, for the first time, something he did not know existed and now cannot imagine doing without. He said nothing, I said nothing. We got him home. The coat was returned in the morning, as promised, with a note from Rowan thanking her for her assistance in terms so correct and so entirely without excess that they communicated nothing whatsoever about what I had seen on his face the night before. This was, I would come to understand, entirely characteristic. What was less characteristic, what I noticed with the particular attention I had begun to pay, was what happened after. Over the following weeks, and then months, and then years, I became aware of a pattern. The Ashwick Rectory governess, whose position had been precarious for some time, found her situation quietly stabilized, a small increase in her wages, a source I never identified but which I suspected. A position was arranged when Nora was 19 and the governess died and she needed work, with a respectable widow in Harwick, arranged, I came to believe, through a chain of introductions so carefully indirect that Nora would never have been able to trace it back to its source. A second position when the first ended after 3 years with a family in Denwick, a good family, a safe household, arranged similarly. Smaller things, a road repaired on a route she used, a situation in Ashwick that had been growing difficult quietly resolved before it became dangerous. Once, a man who had followed her on the Harwick Road and whom she had not, I was fairly certain, been aware of, who vanished from the county within a fortnight and did not return. I did not know how much of this was him. I suspected most of it. I could not prove it because that was the point. He had arranged things so that nothing could be traced, because tracing would mean she would know, and her knowing was not something he permitted himself to pursue. I asked him about it once in the 4th year. We were in the Caldmore Hall library, and I had been watching him read a letter with the specific quality of attention he did not usually bring to correspondence, and I said, with the directness that is the privilege of a younger brother, "You are still looking after Nora Ashby." He put the letter down. He said, "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She has no one." I said, "That is not the only reason." Another silence. He said, "No." That was the entirety of the conversation. We did not have another one like it. But after that he stopped pretending, to me at least, that the pattern I had identified was anything other than what it was. In the 9th year, Nora Ashby came to Ashwick. She came as companion to a widow named Mrs. Clement, who had taken the old house at the north end of Ashwick Village and needed someone to manage her correspondence and her household and the general complexity of her opinions, which were considerable and required a person of some intellectual robustness to manage. I do not know how Mrs. Clement came to engage her. I suspect I know who suggested it. She was 26 by then. I had not seen her since the night on the Moor Road. I had been at a distance for most of the 9 years, and Rowan had not introduced us, for the obvious reason that introducing me to her would have required explaining how he knew of her, which was not a conversation he was prepared to have. She was not what I had expected, which is to say she was exactly what I should have expected from someone who had managed 9 years of a changing situation with consistent competence and dignity. A woman of quiet self-possession, a particular directness in the way she looked at things, a manner that was warm without being performative and careful without being cold. She was also, and I note this only because it becomes relevant, entirely unaware of my brother's existence in any meaningful sense. She knew there was a Duke of Caldmore. Everyone in the county knew there was a Duke of Caldmore, but she had not, as far as I could determine, connected the man who had been found on the Moor Road 9 years ago with the feared 4th Duke. The coat had been returned with a note signed with initials she had not recognized. She did not know. Rowan knew she was in Ashwick within 24 hours of her arrival. I know this because I was at Caldmore Hall when the information reached him, via a route I will not specify because I still find it slightly alarming how efficient his intelligence network was for a man who claimed no interest in other people's business. He absorbed the information with the stillness he brought to all important things. He said nothing. He went back to the report he had been reading. I watched him. He turned a page, then he turned it back. He had not read anything on it. I went and found something to do in another part of the house. The county assembly in Ashwick was held in the 2nd week of November, in the long room above the inn, with the usual attendance and the usual music, and the usual management of social relationships that English county life conducts through such gatherings. Rowan attended because dukes attend assemblies in their county, not because he enjoyed them. He stood near the east wall, which was his customary position, and spoke to the people who came to speak to him with the courtesy he always maintained, and looked at nothing in particular. I stood nearby, as I often did at these events, because my brother at a county assembly is the kind of thing that rewards close observation. She came in with Mrs. Clement at 7:30. I saw Rowan see her, a thing that required no dramatic demonstration, only the particular quality of stillness that settled over him when something he was not prepared to register required him to make a decision about registering it. He looked at the east wall. He looked at the floor. He looked once carefully across the room. She was wearing a dress the color of dark green, not the gray coat of the Moor Road, but something that was quietly her own. She was talking to Mrs. Clement with the quality of attention she brought to everything, and she looked like what she was, a woman entirely at ease in herself, accustomed to navigating rooms on her own terms. She did not look at him. She had no reason to. He watched her for 20 minutes from the east wall and then stopped watching her, which required, I could tell, more effort than anything else he had done that evening. I considered saying something and decided against it. I have learned in the course of 22 years as Rowan Vale's brother when to speak and when to be very quiet indeed. The night the carriage overturned was a fortnight after the assembly, in the 2nd week of November, when the Moor weather had turned the way it turns in November, fast and sideways, and with complete indifference to the plans of anyone caught in it. I know the sequence of that night because I have been told parts of it and witnessed other parts, and because I have spent a great deal of time since assembling them into an order that makes sense. Nora had been to a farmhouse on the Caldmore High Road, an errand for Mrs. Clement, a package to deliver, the same kind of errand she had been doing since she was 17 on these same roads. The night coach back to Ashwick was the last one of the evening. The storm came in at 10 o'clock. The road on the High Moor is not a road that handles a fast-moving coach in a sideways storm particularly well, and there is a section 3 miles from the Ashwick turn where the road drops away on the east side. The coach went over at 10:30. Rowan was on the Moor Road at 10:30. He had been, I learned this later from the coachman who survived, at Caldmore Hall when the storm came in, and had ridden out onto the high road with the specific purposefulness of a man who knew something that required him to be somewhere urgently. Though who told him or how the information reached him, I was never able to establish. He reached the coach 4 minutes after it went over. The coachman was thrown clear and shaken but ambulatory. The other passenger, a merchant from Harwich, had broken his arm. Nora was inside the coach, which had come to rest on its side in the ditch at the east drop, and had not come out. What happened in the next 10 minutes I have pieced together from what Rowan told me, the only time he told anyone, and he told me because I asked him directly, and he was still, 2 days later, in a state in which direct questions bypassed his usual defenses. And from what Nora herself told me much later, when we had arrived at the stage of friendship where she told me things. The coach door was jammed. He got it open. She was inside, unhurt but pinned by a fallen bag that had come off the rack, and she was talking calmly, steadily, the way she had talked to him 9 years ago on the Moor Road, about what she could see through the tilted coach window, which was the storm sky and the shapes of the moor in the lightning. She was keeping herself calm. She was doing what she had always done, managing the situation she was in with the resources available to her. He got the bag off her. He got her out. He stood on the Moor Road in the rain with her coat around her shoulders, his coat, which he had put there while she was finding her feet, and she looked at him for the first time in the firelight from the coachman's lantern. She said, "I know you." He said, "We have not been introduced." She said, 9 years ago, the Eastmoor Road. You were on the ground, I gave you my coat." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Yes." She looked at him. She looked at the coat around her shoulders. She looked at the Moor Road, the damaged coach, the coachman's lantern. She was putting things together. I have watched her put things together since, and it is one of the most efficient processes I have ever observed. She does it the way Rowan does everything, without announcement, just the visible sequence of a mind working through available evidence to its conclusion. She said, "You are the Duke of Caldmore." "Yes," he said. She said nothing else that night, because there was nothing to say on a Moor Road in a storm, and she was practical. She accepted the horse. He had sent for a second one and rode to Ashwick with the coachman leading, and my brother rode behind, and nothing further was said until Ashwick. She came to Caldmore Hall 2 days later. She came alone, on foot, in the gray coat that was now her own rather than one borrowed from necessity, and she asked for the Duke of Caldmore. My brother's housekeeper, who had worked at Caldmore Hall for 30 years, and had an extremely well-calibrated sense of what warranted interruption and what did not, showed her into the library without hesitation, and sent for him immediately. I was in the library. I was there because I had been there since morning, reading, and I had not been asked to leave, and I did not leave now. Neither of them appeared to notice me, which says something about the quality of their attention to each other and nothing particularly flattering about my visibility. She stood in the middle of the library and looked at him with the directness I had come to expect from her and said, "I would like to understand some things." He said, "Sit down if you like." He sat across from her. I remained near the bookshelves, reading nothing, watching everything. She said, "The position in Harwich, 9 years ago after my mother died." "Yes," he said. "And in Denwick." "Yes." She said, "The road in Ashwick. The one that was repaired in the winter of the 4th year." A pause. "Yes." She looked at him. "How many things?" He said, "I kept a record, if you want to see it." She stared at him. She had not, I think, expected that, Then she said, "You kept a record." "I thought you might want to see it someday," he said. "I thought if you ever found out, you should have the complete picture." She was quiet for a moment. I watched her work through this, the particular quality of someone revising their understanding of something they thought they knew, and finding that the revision requires considerably more space than anticipated. She said, "Why?" He said, "You sat with me in the rain for an hour and a half. You gave me your coat. You talked to me so I would stay awake." He looked at his hands. No one had ever done something like that, not for me, not without calculation, not without something wanted in return. She said, "You were a stranger on a road." "Yes," he said, "that is rather the point." She said nothing for a long time. The fire was going in the library. Outside the windows the moor was pale and flat in the November light. I stood near the bookshelves and tried to be very small. Then she said, "You could have introduced yourself. You could have, at any point in 9 years, simply told me." He said, "I know." "Then why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Because what I was doing was not a transaction. I was not arranging things in order to be thanked. I was not looking after you in order to be loved. I was looking after you because," he started again. "Because you were alone and you should not have been. Because you had no one to make sure things went right, and I was in a position to be that person, and it seemed," another pause. "It seemed like the least I could do, not the most, the least." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "You are the most feared man in this county." "So I am told," he said. "You arranged my road." "And other things." "For 9 years." "Yes." She said, "That is the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever done for me." He said, "It is rather ordinary, actually. It is only extraordinary because no one else did it." She was quiet. I watched her understand that this was not modesty, that he meant it precisely, that in his view the ordinary obligation to ensure that a person who had been kind to you was not left to founder alone was simply what one did, and the extraordinary part was that the world had not done it, which said something unflattering about the world and nothing remarkable about him. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Nothing that you are not willing to give freely." A pause. "I would like, if you will permit it, to introduce myself properly. We have been acquainted in one direction for 9 years. I would like to be acquainted in both directions, if that is something you would consider." She looked at him, the fire, the library, the November moor through the windows. She said, "You are asking permission to court me." "I am asking permission to know you," he said. "The rest is not something I would presume. I will compress the next 6 weeks, because they were the happiest weeks I have spent in someone else's company, and because the story of what happened in them is theirs rather than mine. What I can tell you is that she came to Caldmore Hall most days, on her own initiative, not his, which told me everything I needed to know, and that they spent the time in the library, largely, reading and talking and arguing about things in the specific manner of two people who have found that the other person is someone they want to argue with, because argument with them is more interesting than agreement with everyone else. He was different. Not transformed. He was still Rowan, still the still-jawed middle-distance regarding Duke of Caldmore, but the specific quality of his stillness was different, warmer, less defended. I watched him over 6 weeks become gradually less armored in her presence, and I watched her, who had spent 9 years managing on her own and had therefore developed the kind of self-sufficiency that does not easily admit dependence, become gradually less braced against needing someone. Mrs. Clement, for her part, took the whole business with the serenity of a woman who has seen enough of the world to know that the Duke of Caldmore arranging the replacement of a road in Ashwick was not the most surprising thing a feared powerful man had ever done for love, and that her companion's daily visits to Caldmore Hall were entirely her own affair. The county noticed, of course. The county always notices. What it noticed in the first 2 weeks was that Miss Ashby, a companion, a governess's daughter, a woman of no name and no money and no connection, was received at Caldmore Hall with a regularity that could not be explained by any ordinary social obligation. What it noticed in the 3rd week was that the Duke, at the Ashwick assembly to which they both attended, and at which they did not arrive together, but were present in the same room for the first time since the Moor night, sat at the far end of the room and looked across it in a way that even the county, which was not always attentive to the subtleties of Rowan Vale's expression, understood was not the look of a man with no interest in what he was looking at. What it noticed in the 5th week was that Lady Haverson, whose family had been angling for a connection with Caldmore for 2 generations, and who had a niece of suitable birth and suitable accomplishments currently visiting from York, said something at a tea about the unsuitability of the Duke's new association, and that this comment reached Rowan's ear within 48 hours through the usual county channels, and that what happened next became the thing everyone in Ashwick talked about for the following year. The December assembly was the occasion. Rowan arrived, as he always did, precisely on time. I arrived with him, because I was staying at Caldmore Hall, and attending the assembly was what one did when one was staying at Caldmore Hall in December. Nora arrived with Mrs. Clement. The long room was full and warm, the candles lit, the musicians tuning in the corner. Lady Haverson was present. She had positioned herself near the door, which is the position of a woman who intends to manage the arrivals and departures. Her niece Miss Haverson stood with her, a perfectly pleasant young woman who had, I was fairly certain, no interest in marrying Rowan Vale, and had been inserted into this enterprise by her aunt rather than by any preference of her own. Rowan spoke to the people who needed speaking to. He moved through the room with his usual economy of motion. He did not look at Nora, who had arrived on the other side of the room and was talking to Mrs. Clement and 2 of the Ashwick widows. Then Lady Haverson said something to the woman next to her that carried, in the way that rooms at county assemblies sometimes carry things they are not supposed to carry, to a wider radius than she intended. I was close enough to hear it. Rowan was close enough to hear it. It was about Nora's position, her background, her unsuitability, and it was phrased with the particular precision of someone who has thought carefully about how to be devastating without being technically rude. There was a moment of quiet in the room around us, the kind of quiet that is actually very loud. Rowan put down his glass. He said, quietly and with the certainty of a man who has made a decision and is executing it, "Excuse me." Then he walked across the room. He walked the length of the Ashwick assembly room, past Lady Haverson, past the musicians, past the Ashwick widows, and he stopped in front of Nora Ashby and said, without preamble, in a voice that was quiet but that carried in the quiet room, "Miss Ashby, I should like to introduce myself properly. My name is Rowan Vale. We met 9 years ago on the Eastmoor Road, and I should have done this then." She looked at him. The room looked at him. Mrs. Clement, I noticed, had the expression of a woman who had been expecting something and was pleased to find it happening. He said, "I am going to ask you something, and I would like you to understand that the answer is entirely yours and that I will accept it without argument." A pause. "Will you do me the honor of dancing with me?" The room was very still. I watched her look at him. I watched her understand again, with that remarkable efficiency, what the question actually was, and what it meant in a room of this size with this many people watching, and what his walking the length of it to ask it had already communicated to everyone present. She said yes. They danced. The room watched. Lady Haverson stood near the door with the expression of a woman who has played a hand and found it trumped, and said nothing further, and eventually moved to the refreshment table and said something cheerful to someone about the music, which was the correct move and which I respected. I watched my brother dance with a governess's daughter in the Ashwick assembly room, in front of everyone who had ever feared him, and everyone who had ever had an opinion about what was and was not a suitable match for the Duke of Caldmore, and I thought about 9 years. 9 years of small arrangements and repaired roads and positions procured through careful chains of introduction. 9 years of watching from a distance. 9 years of a man who could have said something at any point, choosing instead to do the work quietly, because the work was not for him, it was for her, and to announce it would have made it about him. He had walked the length of the room. That was the announcement. It had taken 9 years to build to it and 30 seconds to deliver, and it was, in its way, the most eloquent thing I have ever seen. They were engaged before Christmas, at Nora's initiative rather than his, which should not have surprised me and did not. She had come to the hall on the Tuesday after the assembly, as she had come most Tuesdays, and she had gone to the library and found him there, and I had removed myself to a different part of the house with some haste, because I had a sense of what was about to happen, and thought it was not something that required an audience. What I was told afterward, she had sat across from him and said that she had been thinking, and that she had decided she would like to give him an answer to a question he had not asked. He had said he had not asked a question. She said she was giving him the answer anyway, and the answer was yes. He had been quiet for a long time, in the way he was quiet when he was working through something that was too large to be worked through quickly, and then he had said that he wanted to be certain she understood that this was not, that there was no obligation from the 9 years, that he did not consider the 9 years as something that required reciprocation, that she was under no. She said she understood all of that. She said the 9 years were not why she was saying yes. She said she was saying yes because in the 6 weeks of being known properly, of the library and the arguments and the particular quality of his attention, she had found someone she wanted to know for the rest of her life. And that was the reason, and she would like him to stop listing the reasons why she should not trust herself on the matter. He had said after another silence that he would stop. And that was that. They were married in March in the Ashwick church in the early spring light. The county attended. Lady Haverson attended with the graciousness of a woman who has decided that being gracious is the most advantageous position available. Miss Haverson attended and danced at the wedding breakfast with evident relief, which confirmed my earlier assessment that she had been in favor of none of it. Mrs. Clement attended, looking extremely satisfied. I stood at Rowan's right hand and tried not to make the face I was making, which was the face of a man who has watched something happen over 9 years and is now seeing it arrive at its correct conclusion and finding this unexpectedly affecting. Nora came up the aisle of the Ashwick church in a dress the color of the winter sky that was not quite white and not quite gray, which was exactly right, and she looked at my brother with the quality of attention she had brought to everything since the night she had sat with an injured stranger on a moor road and talked to him so he would stay awake. He looked back at her, not the middle-distance look, not the careful, defended, nothing-to-see-here look that had been his default for the 20 years before her. The look of a man who has arrived, after 9 years, where he had always been trying to get to. I have spent a great deal of my life observing my brother. I can tell you that I have never seen him afraid of anything, not the estate, not the county, not the weight of a title he did not choose. The only thing I have ever seen him afraid of was the thing he was looking at across the Ashwick church that March morning, which was Nora Ashby saying yes and meaning it, because it was the only thing in his life that mattered enough to fear losing. She said the words, he said the words, the rector concluded. My brother, who does not make gestures, took her hand and held it in a way that communicated clearly and without a word spoken that he intended to go on holding it. Nora, who does not need gestures, held his back. I looked at the spring light coming through the Ashwick church windows and thought about 9 years and what it is to love something entirely, without condition or expectation, and what it costs and what it becomes when it is finally allowed to be what it always was. I think it is the most honest form of courage I know. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself, but the quiet kind the road repaired, the position arranged, the coat around the shoulders in the rain, the length of a room walked in front of everyone. The kind that does not need to be seen to be real, but that is, when finally seen, unmistakable. He had been doing it for 9 years. She had unknowingly been the reason for everything. And now she knew, and now the rest of their lives could begin. That, I think, is the story. I told you at the start that I was not the hero of it. I stand by that. But I will say this, being the witness of it was the privilege of my life, and I have been grateful for it every day since.